Welcome to our ESU 8 presentation on the new Rule 51. I'm Ruth Miller, and I'd like to welcome Rita Hammitt from NDE. I appreciate her driving up to present with us this afternoon. We are doing this in a webinar mode so that those people who could not attend could watch and listen later.
And thank you, Ruth, for inviting me up. It's a real pleasure to come and participate and see how the ESU is communicating and supporting your work with kids with disabilities. So it should be a great afternoon.
We're going to go through each section of Rule 51 that actually has changes that affect the people in the districts who work with students. So the first section is definition of terms. Below age 5 now means children who have not reached their 5th birthday on or before July 31st of the current year. This change was made so that the date now matches Nebraska law for when children are considered school age. There is also a change in the definition of public agency and a change in the definition of school age programs. And again, that was because of the July 31st birthday. In Section 4, the responsibility for special education programs, there are some exceptions to the requirement for free appropriate public education. And those, Rita, include some things about high school diplomas. So if a student has a regular high school diploma, that is an actual diploma. That does not mean a GED or certificate of attendance.
That's absolutely correct. And so even though a student may be awarded that, they still can come back, even if they've received a GED, they can come back and request FAPE services.
All right, thank you.
One more thing we want to add on that graduation thing with having if a student wants to walk with their peers, they can be awarded a certificate of attendance at that graduation ceremony. However, they still are eligible for FAPE until they have received that diploma or aged out at 21.
Oh, okay. So they could have that certificate of attendance so that when they open their folder around their friends or peers, there's still something in that folder that they received. But that doesn't end the school's obligation for special education.
That's correct. And then always make sure you do a change of placement when they have graduated. And I think we catch that a little bit later.
Okay. In Section 4, there were no changes to the section on participation in assessments. All students are expected to participate in assessments. The wording that previously was in rule for secondary disabilities has been removed. Schools only need to report a primary disability for children. And then there were some changes to school district policies and procedures. Or I guess I put this in here, Rita, because I was wondering when the districts do need to change their policies and procedures to match the new Rule 51.
Great question, Ruth. Since Rule 51 didn't have any major changes that would cause any real changes to be made in your policies and procedures, we at the department are continuing to accept what you have already submitted and we have on file. But in the event that you've changed some policies and procedures, then you would need to resubmit those. So the bottom line is good to go.
Good to go. When in the future, will NDE be sending out a set of sample policies and procedures for Rule 51 or 52?
I'm expecting for 52, but probably not for 51.
Okay. Also in Section 004, it talks about districts needing to be monitored at least once every 5 years to ensure compliance with state and federal special education laws and regulations. We're going to share more about this new process for monitoring at the end of the Rule 51 presentation. In Section 4-15, access to instructional materials, this has been in the former rule, but I wanted to remind districts that school districts must provide instructional materials of children with blindness at the same time as other children. So when you are making decisions during the school year about changing textbooks, make sure that you prepare in advance for those students with visual impairments who may need to have an alternative format in the fall. All publishing companies have to be able to provide it in an electronic format of some sort. Section 5 is services for children with birth to 5. This is much shorter than it has been in the past because the regulations for birth to 2 have been moved to Rule 52. In this section, they talk about the annual early childhood meeting and what must be included in that. And at ESU 8, we host the annual early childhood meeting, so we will make sure all of the necessary ingredients are in the mix for the day.
One of the big things there is that a district must participate. All districts must participate.
Okay. Section 005.03 describes the transition plan that must be developed prior to children reaching their 3rd birthdays. Our Early Development Network Services Coordinators do a great job of helping children and families and schools meet the requirement for these transition plans. Section 006 talks about the identification of children with disabilities. The biggest change in this section is that developmental delay may now be considered until the school year in which a child reaches the age of 8, or through the school year in which a child reaches the age of 8.
Previously, it was 9.
It was, and that sent some of our districts into panic this fall.
I'm sure it did.
If you have a student who turned 8 over the summer, Rita, when should we be completing that reevaluation?
You do not need to go out and do another additional MDT immediately if you just did that verification last year. So what we're telling folks is when their 3-year reevaluation comes up, to make that change on those kiddos that are 8.
Okay. And in the future, if a student is going to turn 8 over the summer, should we be doing that reevaluation in the spring before?
Absolutely, because that is the new regulation. So I don't want people to get confused on that because we've said you can wait till their 3-year reeval, but that would be those kiddos that, and there shouldn't be very many of those, because they would have been okay to up until age 9, and those are the ones we're letting you grandfather.
Okay. Emotional disturbance. This is a change in the label, not in the qualification. Behaviorally disordered is no longer listed as a verification. The term has changed to emotional disturbance to match the federal law. If the child is currently verified as behaviorally disordered, you do not need to hold an MDT to change that verification. You would address it at the next re-evaluation.
Yep, same kind of thing we said before. And it could be that you're just notifying them of the disability category change from BD to ED.
The same thing with intellectual disability. Again, this is a change in the term, not in how they qualify. Mental handicap has now been changed to an intellectual disability to match the federal law. And I'm going to go back for a second because I had a question from a teacher yesterday about specific learning disabilities. Although the law, Rule 51, does not say anything about having a discrepancy, should we still include a full evaluation that has a psychologist involved doing an observation, looking at the child's cognitive level, as well as the academic levels?
That's a really good question, Ruth. The thing to keep in mind there is the criteria for verifying SLD requires more criteria. And of course, having a school psychologist involved with the observations and looking for the patterns and so forth, it's best practice to have the school psychologist involved with that. And I like how you bring up the discrepancy. That is one test. That's one piece of information. The discrepancy, a point discrepancy, was actually removed from Rule 51 for a particular reason, that we wanted to assure that the teams were using multiple sources of information to determine eligibility. So I would say best practice is to have your school psychologist involved. Rule does not just specify who is required members of the MDT team.
Okay. Thank you. Section 7 deals with individualized education programs. In section 007.02, the phrase good faith effort was removed, and they also removed the phrase implemented as soon as possible. So when should an IEP meeting be held after an evaluation has been completed?
The regulations require, and if you want a reference, it's in section 9.04A2 that the IEP must be held within 30 days of verification. You must have an IEP meeting within the 30 days. And then when services need to start is identified in the IEP on the services page, and they should be started within reasonableness of when that would be. Maybe you need to get something together or something implemented, and so you would identify that date. Typically, most services start the same day that the IEP is in effect.
Okay. The next section deals with IEP Team Attendance. Section 007-04B says a member of the IEP team may be excused from attending an IEP in whole or in part when the meeting involves a modification to or discussion of the services if the parent in writing and the school district consent to the excusal, and the member submits in writing to the parent and the IEP team input into the development of the IEP prior to the meeting. Many of your districts received a memo from their school lawyers concerning a new court case that had recent findings, and these pertained to the team members who leave early. Do we need to have written parental consent if someone needs to leave an IEP team before it is finished?
The key words there is in that regulation where it says in whole or in part. So the required IEP team members need to be there for the entire meeting unless they have received that prior consent of excusal for the participant. Now, the question comes up, well, the PE teacher needs to leave for football practice, but we have a special education teacher, we have an general education teacher, we have the district rep there, they're still there, then you do not need to have that excusal. Okay. It's just what I call the magic 4 or 5. 4 is your SPED teacher, your gen ed teacher, the parent, district rep, and the 5th individual who can wear 2 hats is the individual to interpret any evaluation results. And remember, evaluation results is not limited to standardized testing, but could be even classroom performance.
Oh, okay. So our very busy occupational therapists and physical therapists who cover many schools, who might be wanting to join an IEP meeting for just 15 minutes out of the hour-long meeting, they could do that without prior written consent from the parents?
Yes, they could, because they most likely are not the special ed teacher, primary special ed teacher, or general ed teacher, representing general ed. It's always nice and best practice that the parent is cordially asked and said, you know, Mrs. OT needs to leave here, and is that okay with you, or shall we reconvene the meeting? You always want to be sure and value your partnerships and relationships with your parents as much as you can, and that's just common courtesy.
Okay. Section 008 talks about placement of children with disabilities. So, Rita, when is prior written notice of a change of placement needed? Is it a change of building, a change of district, or a change of services? Well,
initial placement into special education, a change of placement on services would be if it's significant. Maybe the student was only receiving speech and language and now is going to spend time in the resource room. It would be good to, you know, notice that. People will say, but we were all around the IEP table. We all agreed. We all put it on the IEP. What's the big deal here? It is just a re-summary, and when in doubt, it's always good to have that extra piece of paper. You may have a parent who's nodding and and so you can just politely say, this is something I need to give you, just to be real clear about what big changes were here. But if we're changing speech from 30 minutes a week to 5 minutes, that's not significant.
Okay.
Now, I did want to reiterate in the change of placement is also when a student graduates or ages out.
We should be doing that the week of graduation or after graduation? When do we do the notice of change of placement?
What the regulations require that you do a change of placement notification prior to ceasing those services. I don't know where the reference on that is, but so you could do that May 1st, and then the notice says services would be ending May 15th.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. How about I have a student who's leaving my district? Do I need to do a change of placement, just saying student is no longer going to be student at District A? Or is it okay for them to walk out the door and move to District B without that change of placement?
It is okay. And people make that mistake, and they'll do what they call a discontinuation of services form, which can be very misleading because the student continues to always be eligible until an MDT evaluation has been determined that the student is no longer eligible. So when people do this discontinuation of services, they're going to do that. They better be sure and say, and the student continues to be eligible for special education. So they might say, we're discontinuing from District A of those services, but your child still continues to be eligible. So, and why go to all that paperwork? Just get the kiddo in the new program in the new district.
And the new district can take over. Procedural safeguards. This is usually the section that talks about things that should be included in parental rights. We don't yet have a new parental rights brochure. Will there be one that reflects Bill 51?
I don't think there is going to be a new one real soon. It's probably on the back burner at our department on that. They are working on one for Rule 52.
Okay.
So, you know, it's fine to use the same parental rights brochure that you have right now currently.
Okay.
As Ruth said earlier, there's really been no changes in any of the regulations, the eligibility and so forth. It's the biggies are those two handicapping conditions are been renamed.
Okay. Next, we provide the parental rights. Rule 55, which should be dated 2012. I've seen some older versions lately. And a copy of the complaint and hearing procedures from the new Rule 51 to parents.
Correct. And you only have to do that once a year, and the good news is a parent can elect, if they choose, to receive it electronically.
Then we don't have to kill so many trees.
No, and so if you had their email and they say, yes, I'd like to have that just emailed to me, you can do that and save some paper from your district. Technology.
Oh, but I'm going to get at least 10 questions tomorrow about, do we need to do Rule 55 once a year or just the parental rights once a year?
I knew she'd throw one at me, and I believe it is 55 yearly.
Okay.
I will double check that, but I'm pretty certain that's Rule 55 is every year.
I was thinking Rule 55 was when we did a new evaluation, but we will, it's late in the afternoon, so we'll double check and get an email out to everyone about.
You know, you're just exactly right. It is just the procedural safeguards. Is once a year, parent requests, complaint or due process, or if there's a disciplinary action.
Ooh. So if I've given the parental rights at an IEP meeting in September, but we have a disciplinary action in December, and we're going to be talking about possible placement things, we need to bring that parental rights back out.
Yes, you do.
And Rule 55.
And the procedures, yeah.
Yeah, and Rule 55 is just for an initial evaluation, or perhaps when we're going to discontinue services, because that's all the complaint and hearing things.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And I'm checking over the slides. So far, we've only had one question, and you already answered it, Rita. So we're doing well, or we haven't given people a chance to even type yet because we've moved pretty quickly. Procedural safeguard 009.03J4. If a child is enrolled or is going to enroll in a non-public school that is not located in the school district of the parent's residence, parental consent must be obtained before any personally identified information about the child is released between the school districts. So what that means is if there is a child who lives in District A but attends a non-public school in District B, the non-public school and District B are going to do an evaluation. District B cannot call District A and say, heads up, this little one is going to qualify for services and we're going to invite you to a meeting. They must first ask the parents for consent. And should that be a written release of information?
Yes, and I'm glad you bring that up because we have an unofficial complaint that I'm aware of. I don't know if the parent has actually filed that complaint with our department, but that was exactly the problem. She had enrolled her child in non-public school in District B and didn't want anything to do with District A, and then District A knew all about that. Now, people will get really concerned about some of this because I have to talk to them about whether they want equitable or FAPE services. And either District A or District B can talk to the parent, whoever is initially working with this child, and explain FAPE versus equitable. So it's kind of
to the parent without involving
the other districts. That's correct. That's correct. And some people have said, well, what if they go to their resident district and want an evaluation, and they go to where the non-public is and say, I want an evaluation there, but neither one know about it. We would hope that would not happen. We don't know of any cases, but again, sometimes I think the way to resolve that is when you're talking with the parent to say, would you mind and would you give consent for sharing this information with your district?
Okay, thank you. There was a section added to the procedural safeguards to clarify that participation or attendance at programs by children with verified disabilities from the date of diagnosis to age 5 is voluntary as specified by the parent. So no matter how much the rest of the team, how strongly they feel about a child under the age of 5 needing to be enrolled in a preschool program, it's the parent's choice on when they actually start to receive services at the school rather than at home. So if mom says, no, I'm just not ready to send them to preschool, we provide those special education services where the child is until mom and dad are ready to take that next step. Oh, Rita, this is a whole new section, and I'm going to turn this section over to you because I am not understanding whether this is just dealing with Medicaid or if school districts could actually access some private insurance.
Actually, school districts could access private insurance, but with the FAPE and so forth, this is in the federal regs, and I don't want to say it doesn't apply to Nebraska, but we don't see this being done at all.
Okay.
So
there really isn't even a procedure in place at the State Department for school districts to then get reimbursement for the portion, the fees that they would have in helping the parents with that private insurance.
That's correct.
And what I mean is not buying insurance for the families, folks. It's if a school district were to ask the parents if they could access their insurance to help pay for services for a child, they would have to make sure that the family doesn't incur any cost. So they'd have to pay the co-pays or the deductibles, and there is just nothing in place in Nebraska to then get reimbursement on that amount of money. So for now, please continue to provide the services the child needs through your school district funds and your IDEA grants.
That's right. And once in a while, you'll find a really, really involved student who has lots of needs. And it's real tricky because if you say, well, the parent says, well, I have unlimited speech and language services I get through my insurance. When Ruth makes comment about that it doesn't impact the eligibility for that insurance, you got to be aware that many insurance policies have a lifetime maximum. And that's where that could fall in. So bottom line, provide your FAPE and continue on.
Continue to provide it the way you have then. In Section 10, there were some changes to the qualifications for special education personnel. The category assignments have been changed to match emotional disturbance and intellectual disability. A section was removed. In that section, school districts could receive a waiver for sign language interpreters if they were unable to find someone who could pass the test. That waiver opportunity has been removed. Section 11 and 12 are on funding and reimbursement. The biggest change that I noted in there is that NDE will be determining an average per pupil cost for elementary students and for secondary students. And as Gary shared with us in August, they are trying to do that at the state level behind the scenes so that the individual districts don't need to try to figure out what those two different costs are.
And that's going to take a little time because we always need to know what the federal reimbursements are going to be and so forth. So stay tuned.
Okay, Rita, I know that we had a district who piloted the new monitoring process last year, and it went well in our area, but I'd like you to explain, I know we have 3 districts that are going to go through monitoring, or what we know as file review, in February of this school year. So would you explain to everyone what the components of the new monitoring process are?
Well, sure, I'd love to. And I think you'll love it in that it's much different in that it takes much less of your valuable time away from the classroom. And so the way this works is every 5 years, as before, your district will be monitored, and instead of NDE coming out and pulling about 25 to 30 files or whatever and having all of you sit around the table and we go over each regulation individually, now we will only be collecting 1 student file from each level, preschool, elementary, middle school, and high school. And in some cases, if there's multiple elementaries, we might ask for one from each of those separate buildings. Those files are brought into our office, or if the district elects, they can give us access to SRS, and we'll just view them electronically. We'll review those, and we have a monitoring team of 4 individuals. I'm on that team. And we will look through those files specifically for transition, as we have to report to the feds on that indicator of that there's post-secondary goals in there and that criteria is met. But as we review those files, if we see something that looks a little strange or something's missing, we will make a note of that. We will not be putting that on your website as compliance or non-compliance. Then, this is all done at our Lincoln office. Then, as a result of that, and we look at all of your information besides just the student files, because our intent here is for monitoring and how can that support improve student outcomes. So we will be looking at your district determinations, how you're doing on the academic performance, the participation, least restrictive environment. We're looking at the size of your district, the percentage of identified students, just data like that. If we've been having parents calling in with lots of questions, or if we receive formal complaint or due process, that all is put together and considered. And then we send out a little memo to the district saying we will be coming on site and we'll want to review about 3 or 4 of your transition students, which is those students that will be 16 or older in the duration of their IEP. And then let's say we saw something pretty funky about you weren't inviting the parent to the IEP meeting, or we saw that there were several where the parents weren't invited. We would make a note of that and ask to review some files to see are the parents being invited. Then we will even give you up to 14 days to do any correction before we would move into a corrective action plan. So we are finding this takes about an hour visitation time with the district. There will be 2 monitoring team individuals come out. We'll ask to review those focus files, particularly the transition ones, and maybe no other files. And then we will meet with the administration and whoever they'd like to have. And we would report back as to what our perceptions were and what we found or what needed to be fixed. Or if you had further questions, we can answer those questions at that time. But it's been going rather smoothly. And I guess that's it.
And then after that interview that day at the school, if there's a corrective action plan, what happens next?
Then the district, just as before, on their ILSED website, would type in the corrective action plan, how that's going to be taken place. It's still all the same. You have a 1 year for correction, but we do come back to document that correction's been made within 9 months, just in case. Maybe there wasn't clear understanding or there still needs to be some more tweaking on that. We still have 3-month buffer period. We don't want to go over that year because if we do, then the district gets a nasty letter, but they have 30 days for correction, and we'll have to report that to OSEP, Office of Special Education Populations in Washington, D.C., and then our state has stuff to do, and we don't want to do that. So we try to be very proactive.
And you have been. You've been good about coming back out to see what the districts are doing and providing some additional guidance or answering questions. We had quite a few districts last year that were in the old monitoring process, and you've been out to visit almost all of them. But again, this year's districts, and there are 3 of them, will be in the new new and improved and maybe more user-friendly.
I hope so, yeah. And then as a result of that, our comments, we're hoping that you can, as a district, take that information as you move into your school district improvement plan.
Our results-driven accountability. All right. I'm going to give you a couple of minutes, those of you who are listening and watching this afternoon, to type in questions. If you have questions about anything that Rita and I have discussed, I know that we have one that says, do we need to do a change of placement when a student moves out of our district? And I believe we answered that earlier, that no, it is not needed. You can skip one more form or one piece of paper in the process. Looking to see who's all with us this afternoon.
I think you have some parent-teacher conferences going on already tomorrow night, maybe?
Yes, there are some this week and next week in our districts. Instead of waiting until the end of the first quarter, they have some when we're 3 to 4 weeks into school. So if there are difficulties, everyone can sit down and start to problem solve with those children.
So all of the kids in that school would have a parent conference, or just those that were having difficulty?
In most of our districts, everyone has a parent-teacher conference in either September or October.
Great.
So parents and teachers get to meet each other. Oh, we have a couple people typing. They have questions for us. And Rita, ESU 8 did print copies of the new Rule 51, and we sent them out to all of our resource teachers, speech therapists, and school psychologists who serve students in our area. And this is a friendly reminder that if you haven't received your new purple book, please send an email to ruth@esu8.org, and I will make sure that you receive a copy. Rita, if a parent wants their child removed from services, parent is selecting this, do we do a discontinuation, but then specify that the child is still eligible for services?
That's absolutely correct. You would do a prior written notice, and what the district's proposing to do is discontinue services, and the basis for that determination is on parent request or written request on Tuesday, September whatever, and you'd also want to be sure and include in there that the student remains eligible, and should they change their mind, who they may contact to resume those services.
Okay. Would that apply in the birth to 2 range too? I know we're talking school age, but I have a couple of parents, couple of situations in mind. I want to make sure we've got all the paperwork in place.
Yes. The bottom line rule is, when in doubt, fill out a piece of paper.
Document, document, document.
I did note that I do look at a lot of files up here in ESU 8, and people really want to be very comprehensive in what they're putting in their IEP, but you know, you do not need to go, and the IEP is from, let's say we're having an IEP meeting today for the next year. You don't want to focus on that information forward. And oftentimes we'll see these IEPs that are like 30 pages long because they have included the MDT report, the MDT verification, which was 7 years ago, and you can delete that. I mean, I think SRS automatically throws that up there, but you can save paper. Remember, it's an IEP, an annual IEP, and you do not need all of that because the parent had that previously. And I'll hear some people say, oh, but the parent wants all of that. I beg to differ that I, as a parent, want to hear that low IQ score of 7 years ago. Because we're working on developing a plan, individualized instructional plan, from this day forward. So you don't have to have that in there. It's not wrong that you have it in there, but it's very cumbersome with 30 pages.
It is. And sometimes when when we take the time to thoroughly review all of that past history, we're extending that meeting time so much that it makes it difficult for the 5 big players to be there for that whole time.
And to really be having the discussion of what you need to be having that discussion on. So keep that in mind. You know, I always said to my staff when I was in schools was, you know, none of us like to go to a conference or something and sit there for an entire hour and never have a break. And these IEP meetings that go on for an hour with no break, think about how well anybody is really functioning after an hour with no break. So, you know, you want to be concise and you want to say, we've got an hour to do this, and maybe 10, 15 minutes before that hour is going to be up, someone says, you know, I will interrupt and we'll reschedule that meeting. But what will happen is you won't have to hear about the bake sale and the cookies that they made, and, you know, it'll be more concise discussion.
So if mom's coming in for an IEP scheduled for Rita, but she wants to bring up that Ruth lost her best book bag, can we put that in a parking lot to take care of it after the IEP meeting?
Yeah.
Or I'm here for Rita, but I have concerns for Ruth. Can we talk about her? No, but we could schedule another conference. And really staying focused on the agenda for the day.
And if you bring, and we really are promoting, and best practice really promotes that the student, elementary on up, is participating at that IEP, even if it's as simple as this 3rd grader sharing about one of his assignments he was actually very proud of or had difficulty on. That really keeps the IEP meeting focused to what you're there for.
Focused on the student. Well, Rita, I'm not seeing any other questions.
Well, that's good.
And I thank you for your time and expertise this afternoon. And I thank those of you who were able to participate with us live. If you had planned your day around the possibility that this might actually take 2 hours, congratulations and surprise. You have a nice surprise and some time to work on that paperwork or to return to students. Again, we will be posting this link on the ESU8 website. It'll probably be up sometime tomorrow. Oh, there might be one more question, or maybe it's a thank you.
But while we're waiting for that question, I want to thank you, Ruth, and all of you for the opportunity. I always enjoy so much coming up and driving around in the ESU8 area and meeting you, and importantly, to see what's happening in schools so that we down at the Department of Education haven't lost sight of what we're really all here about. So you have a great leader, Ruth, and she's always, if she has questions, she'll give me a call, and we try and get the answers as quickly as we can.
We do, and we do have one more question, and I'm sorry that we missed it. It is the question that comes in often at this time of the year. Why do we need to do an evaluation for a student when they move in from out of state already eligible for special ed in another state?
Well, that's a great question, because what you need to do when a student comes in from another state and then mom says, here's his IEP, you must implement that as best you can. Meanwhile, you get consent for evaluation for determination of eligibility according to the Nebraska Rule 51. Some states have different criteria than we do. I find it's pretty rare that a student that was eligible in another state would not continue to be eligible, but we have found that to be the case. So,
and sometimes that second look in Nebraska doesn't include redoing all of the evaluation tests.
That's right.
Our school psychologist and speech therapist can look at when the evaluation was done in the former state and what instruments were used, and if there is enough information there to follow Rule 51 and our verification guidelines to make a verification in Nebraska, they won't do new testing. But if there's some missing pieces that are required under Rule 51, then we will do some evaluation and observations here to have all of the pieces in place.
You're absolutely right, and I was going to bring that up because it's the MDT team who determines what, if any further evaluations need to be done. And kids do change depending on where they were and what they were doing.
An initial evaluation is when a child is being evaluated to qualify for the first time. There is some confusion, Rita, when a child's been evaluated in kindergarten and didn't qualify. So then when we're seeking consent in 4th grade, is that initial because he never qualified in special education? Or is that a re-evaluation because we've taken a look before?
Yes, and we at the department, and we've waffled back and forth on that. And the bottom line is initial placement is placement into what I call the world of special education. It's not a place or a building. So I would suggest you, at minimal, you get that placement form signed because the kiddo is now coming into the world of special education, and to use an initial I think is most appropriate. However, if you did this and didn't do initial, it's still okay. The bottom line is that you have placement into special education.
And part of this question comes from the fact that they just needed to report on their initial evals completed in 45 days. So can that same student be counted twice as an initial eval because they didn't qualify 3 years ago and now they're coming? But we don't report by student, we report by numbers. So
that's correct.
It'd be fine.
Yeah. And by the way, I think almost all of the districts did get that done.
Oh, good. That was going to be my question after
we did. I think we have one district left to get that in, and I think the cutoff on that was like October 1st or 15th. I can't recall exactly, but I can give them a quick call, and we'll get that taken care of.
Yes, it is an initial evaluation until they are actually placed in special education for because they qualified for special education. That sparked more questions than our presentation did. So they could have 5 initial evaluations. I would hope, and I think Rita would concur, that a child wouldn't be going through a formal evaluation 5 different times in their 21 years of eligibility, but if they did, yes.
I would really wonder what was going on there with the SAP process. Mm-hmm. If you're getting that many evaluations, and that maybe they are, just threw that out there as a number. But
yeah, and yes, it is initial when they move in from out of state because they're qualifying for Nebraska for the first time. And yes, there has been some waffling on that in the past, but initial is when they qualify for in Nebraska for the first time. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Great. Have a good day.